Davis, Fastpath. And specifically what we want to talk about today is around security and controls and the proactive management and automation of those of the security and controls monitoring within Oracle EBS. More specifically, we'll talk about the Fastpath solution, namely the Assure product as well as the Audit Trail application. But before we get into too much of that, just give you an overview of both Alex and myself, so you'll know at least who's presenting today. But first of all, we'll cover, introduce Alex and myself, then we'll go through kind of the foundation for Oracle EBS security, which my guess is that you're somewhat familiar with if you're on this call today. But if not, we'll at least start with that so we have a baseline on which to build from. And then we'll talk about more specifically how the Fastpath Assure and Fastpath Audit Trail applications can assist. All right. So I'll turn it over to Alex very quickly.
Yep, thanks, Brian. So just by way of quick introduction, my name is Alex Davis. I'm our current Director of Sales here at Fastpath. I've got 4 years of audit and compliance experience now in industry, and a lot of that previous experience before Fastpath that I have came from both Gartner Group, as well as LexisNexis.
Very good. And so myself, Brian O'Neill, I have literally grown up in this space, in the Oracle security and control space. My first job was as an applications consultant at Oracle, which I did for a year. So that's where I cut my teeth on the applications. This is actually back when Oracle applications were still green screen. So I've been working with these applications for many years. From Oracle, I went to Ernst & Young when they were forming what they call their application controls consulting practice, and did that for a number of years, ultimately leading Ernst & Young's global Oracle securities and controls practice out of New York. So I've been in the space now for over 20 years, specifically doing Oracle security and controls. Along with my time at E&Y, as I said, I was in the space for a long time. The very first continuous controls monitoring product for Oracle is actually a company called Tickmark Solutions out of New York City. And I happen to be the beta tester for that application. So when I say I've been in the space from day one, I literally have been in the space from day one. When I left Oracle, or when I left Ernst & Young, it was due to the fact that E&Y had become their auditors, and so I started Appsurance in 2004, and we have grown to become a leading global provider of the Oracle security and controls solutions. And we have done over 100 application implementations for continuous controls monitoring for Oracle EBS. So I have a lot of deep expertise across Oracle. So let's start with the Oracle security fundamentals, all right, and just we'll level set with everybody on the phone. When we talk Oracle security fundamentals, specifically what we're talking about is the security model within Oracle EBS, which at the highest level is user, and a user is assigned, can be assigned a role or multiple roles, and within those roles are responsibilities, or user can just be assigned responsibilities if not using role-based access control. Those responsibilities are comprised of menus. Those menus have submenus, and at the most granular level is the function. Now, functions could be a field on a form. It could be a concurrent request or a report. But ultimately, what companies want to identify are the functions that a user has access to, and then when you look at across functions, which users have access to those functions. Therein lies the challenge. And the challenge is this: Oracle security is not easy. It is complex. No fault of consultants, no fault of developers, just as the applications have been developed over time, it's just getting more and more complex. So what I mean by that is this. We'll take an example of a buyer within an organization, and this is not to be an all-inclusive list, but we'll go for our example that the buyer requires access to purchasing, to Oracle inventory, to payables, and to iExpense. More specifically, we'll say that this buyer needs access to requisitions and purchase orders through purchasing, or they might need access to receiving transactions within inventory. But in payables, they want to be able to view suppliers, invoices, payments, and then if using iExpense, they need to be able to complete an expense report. Okay, again, it gets more complicated. So that information is then given to the sysadmin, and here's the dilemma. The sysadmin says, I need to build this responsibility or assign this role or assign this responsibility to the buyer so that he or she can do his or her job, but what do I assign to the user? So the sysadmin sits down and says, okay, I need to assign through these Oracle modules, I need to assign this functionality. There's a problem. When you look at requisitions, okay, I need to assign this buyer access to requisitions. Well, again, I said Oracle security is complex. There are multiple access points or functions that allow a user to create, update, modify a requisition. So which of these am I choosing from? Good question. Okay, I now need to assign access to purchase orders. Again, which of these functions do I need to assign to the user? Because each allows varying access to purchase orders, and you want to make sure you're giving that the appropriate access to, in this case, the buyer. Same thing with suppliers. I need to, this buyer likely just needs to be able to view suppliers. They might need to be able to modify certain attributes of the vendor, but which of these functions are going to allow him or her to do only what they need to do in order to do their job? And then even with invoices, even more complex. Again, these are all different ways in which you can, as a system administrator, assign access rights to the user or to the buyer more specifically. All right. So the challenge that organizations have had is, first and foremost, is understanding all the different ways which a user can actually perform a given task within Oracle. What we oftentimes find is when they do these SOD reviews manually, that they've come to find a few of the different ways that a user can do, say, update suppliers, but more times than not, they've only identified, they've not identified all of the different ways a user can do a vendor, do an invoice, or cut a check for that matter. So let's talk about a company we've recently worked with to kind of drive home that point, and this is a real life example. This is an organization based in the Midwest, about $800 million annual revenue. A fairly large Oracle footprint. Of when I say footprint, meaning the different modules used by Oracle. They're financial, supply chain, manufacturing, HR, payroll, and they have operations across the U.S., more specifically North America, and Asia. We got involved as they were going to do their EBS upgrade, which is a very common point for us to get involved. And we were meeting with the Senior Vice President and CIO. Little history on her. She has been with this company for over 20 years and actually led this company's implementation of Oracle when it was 10.7. So she started as a functional consultant, became an employee, started from business analyst, became a finance lead, became the assistant controller, then the corporate controller, and now she is the Senior Vice President and CIO of this global organization. I tell you that because she, from day one of Oracle, when they put it in version 10.7, has always owned user security within Oracle. And to this day, as a Senior Vice President and CIO, she continues to own security, application security for Oracle. So as users come and go within this organization, she is the one who approves or declines what users can or can't do within Oracle. So she has a really good understanding of Oracle. And I'll tell you why all that matters in a minute. We got involved with the upgrade, and her first response to us in terms of needing a tool around security monitoring, configuration type monitoring was, well, Brian, we do this every year manually. We've been doing it since the day we went live on 10.7, and more importantly, our auditors also run their proprietary tool every single year to confirm that what we think our issues are actually identified and have been mitigated. And I said, that's great, but I still think, given the complexity of your implementation, the breadth of the modules in use, that you could benefit from having a continuous controls monitoring solution in place. So I made a bet with her. I said, if we run the tool and we find issues, then you have to agree to license the applications. And she said, okay. So I let her pick these 8. It could have been 10, could have been 12. She selected these segregation of duty conflicts. You see that they're around procure to pay because obviously that's cash out the door, so she felt like that was a higher risk cycle, which I agreed. And so we ran it, and come to find out, this organization that thought they had Oracle application security locked down, it was anything but. We ran the tool and identified 30,000 violations, whether it be restricted access violations or SOD violations, within their Oracle footprint. So here, this person, no fault of her own, thought, and rightfully so, thought they had Oracle security mastered, and she nearly fell off her chair when we presented the results, to the point where she leaned next to her system administrator, who's also in the meeting, whispered things which I couldn't hear. That person left the room, came back about 30 minutes later, whispered some more, and basically the CIO said, it looks like I'm unlicensing the software, meaning that these weren't false positives. These were actual things that existed in the environment that they were completely unaware of. Okay? So just an example there of the importance of, if you're trying to do this manually, it's just very, very difficult because of the complexity of Oracle EBS security. And the more operating units you have, the more sets of books or ledgers you have, the more inventories, orgs you have, that problem grows exponentially, with more operating units, ledgers, and inventory orgs. Okay. So what can you do to manage this? So Fastpath has an application called Assure, which continuously monitors application security within Oracle EBS and other ERPs, as we'll talk about shortly. The beauty of and the value of Assure from Fastpath is it's really not just meant for Oracle. Many of our clients use more than just, they have more than one ERP, whether domestically, whether in different parts of the world. The Fastpath solution out of the box is available for Oracle, for Microsoft, SAP, NetSuite, Salesforce, Financial Force, and Alex will correct, but there's others ERPs as well that you can deploy the Fastpath Assure product and actually get visibility to your application security segregation duties from a single user interface. So just know that while we're talking today about Oracle EBS, should your organization have other applications, that the Fastpath Assure solution goes across those ERPs, across those applications, to give you that visibility of what users can do within and across those applications. Okay? So the way it works is very simple. You, as either an EBS support team, the business, IT, you identify what business processes you want to know what your users can do within. So, for example, a business process might be, create AP invoice, create supplier, and the tool comes pre-populated with the functions that are applicable to, in this case, create invoice or create supplier, which I don't have them all listed here. And then it's a matter of creating that. If you want to add others, you can go into Assure. You can use what comes pre-populated. If it's not there, part of our value add as a consulting firm is we know what those other ones might be, should you need them, the functions that you would need to include, and we quickly build those for you. So in this case, the example is adjusting physical inventory. This is a sum of the functions that make up the ability to adjust physical inventory. If there's others that you have, if there are custom functions that you have for these different business processes, which is not uncommon, we can very quickly add. Again, not a customization. We just click and find that specific function. We add it to this business process, and you can then run that as is. Or more commonly, you may want to have an SOD rule that says, well, who can do X and Y? In this case, who can adjust physical inventory and make an AP payment? All right. So once you then define your business process on the previous screen, this is where now you define your conflict or your rule set. and then you run those different rule sets, which will then quickly tell you for this rule set, in this case, these are the responsibilities that can do both of those functions. And then also you can then run another report that says, oh, well, here are the users that have the ability to do those, incompatible business processes. Okay, this isn't to say that their access is not appropriate, because in many organizations there are certain users who just their job is to do certain things, so they're going to have a level of access that's greater, or the authority that's greater than others. So this is not meant to say that these users can't do it, and this tool doesn't, it's not here to prevent them from not being able to do it, but it does say that for this specific rule, these are the responsibilities, these are the users that can do that. Now, the auditors come in, both internal or external, and they're going to want to see for this conflict, well, what are you doing as an organization to mitigate that risk? So Assure allows an end user, whether it be the business, whether it be audit, whether it be an analyst, can come in here and define what the risk mitigation is, the status of it. It doesn't have to be remediated right then. It could be something that you can say, be remediated next quarter, 6 months, next year, and then put in a note. You could refer, if you're a publicly traded company and you have a risk and controls library, you can very quickly reference the very specific control or controls that mitigate this risk. So therefore, you can then report on this when the auditors come in and they ask you, well, I see that you have X number of users that can enter a vendor and enter an invoice. You can say, yes, we do. However, these are the controls we have in place to mitigate the risk of those users having that access. Okay? So it's a very streamlined process of define the business processes that are important to you, leverage what comes available within the product. If the application doesn't have it, it's a very easy process for us to add it, meaning any custom functions, any business processes that are not defined. We then run that rule set and work with you on the remediation of both the intra-responsibility conflicts, which the conflicts within a given responsibility, and the inter-responsibility conflicts, which is users that have access to these have access to these things via multiple user responsibilities, which is oftentimes the case. We typically go through and help remediate the intra-responsibility conflicts, because that's oftentimes a high risk is who can do these incompatible things within a given with one responsibility, get that cleaned up, and then we'll go then and say, well, let's clean up now the inter, because a user can say enter a vendor and process an AB payment because they have access to two different responsibilities. Okay. Now, that's one side of what I refer to as Audit 101. Audit 101 to me is two things, and that is user access controls and program change controls. And whether you're publicly traded or you're privately held organization, those two things, Audit 101, must be addressed by internal audit and business, or via external audit. So the Assure product specifically handles the user access controls, testing, analysis, remediation. The second product within the Fastpath tool set is Audit Trail. Now, Audit Trail allows you to proactively manage or monitor the underlying configurations within Oracle EBS. By underlying configurations, specifically what I'm talking about is like your application configuration data, such as your application security, your chart of accounts, your users, your roles, responsibilities, and also operational data. So your vendor master file, your employee master, your buyers, your items. All right, and why is that important? It's important because a lot of those underlying configurations are both key or significant financial and operational controls. Whether you're public or private, you you would want to have visibility if somebody were to go in and start adjusting your invoice match tolerances, your invoice approval limits, your chart of accounts, things of that nature that could have a trickle-down effect and actually then therefore materially would cause you to have a potentially material mistake on the transaction side, because the way these application configurations are configured, most of them directly map to a business process of where you're entering transactions into Oracle EBS. So if a change is made to one of these underlying configurations, it's going to ultimately impact one or more business processes. So to operate Oracle and not have near real-time visibility to what's changing on the configuration side, it can be dangerous. All right. So if I look at, just give you a couple of examples here, and those familiar with Oracle, these will be very familiar. Within Oracle Payables, there's an option called Payables Options. Now, as you can see on that screenshot there, I'm just showing one tab of multiple tabs for Payables Options. The reason for that, I'll show you on the next slide, but within the object called Payables Options, there are hundreds of options that you could monitor, but doesn't mean you have to monitor all of them, nor would I recommend you monitor all of them. So for instance, if you don't use prepayments, then why would you want to monitor the prepayment payment terms? You wouldn't, because you're not using that functionality, so why would I care if that configuration were to change? So I'll show you on the next screen why that's important. Another setup option that you would probably want to monitor is journal sources. Those third-party systems or applications that feed into your general ledger. This is significant, for example, because if you're transferring your payables transactions over to GL, one of the options there is freeze journals, as you can see. Oftentimes, our clients will set that to yes with a lot of their journal sources, because they don't want users to be able to go in and adjust things in GL without having adjusted that in the subledger. All right, so if somebody were to go in and make that change, you would want to know that change has occurred, and more importantly, know who did the change, when they did the change, okay, and what was the old value, what's the new value. All right, so the Audit Trail application from Fastpath is very flexible. It's not an all or nothing application. So essentially how it works is you identify those objects that you are interested in, that are relevant to you, that where you see risk to your organization, and those are driven by what are called templates. So here's just in alphabetical order. This is just the very beginning of that list of values, but essentially you're able to go in and identify which objects you want to monitor. So it could be accounting calendar, it could be AP payment terms, which is typically significant. All right. But then, sticking with my payables options example, you noticed on that form above, if I go up here, and on the left-hand side, you'll see that there are many setup options associated with payables options. So what you can do with an Audit Trail is go in and you'll see on the far right side the select deselect. This is where you can go in and specifically identify which of those attributes you want to have Audit Trail on, specifically which of those objects or attributes you want to know if and when somebody goes in and makes a change and who made the change. Further, you'll see up at the top that the trigger type, the insert, update, delete. You can even determine if you don't want to track inserts but only updates or deletes, you can do that. So it's flexible and it allows you to choose based upon your business processes, your control processes, what is tracked in terms of the object. Inserts, update, delete are tracked. Okay, it allows you that flexibility to decide versus the application forcing you to do it one way or the other. It's running in the background, and when you choose to review what's changed, whether it be daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, those changes are all captured. And then on the dashboard here, you're able to go in and look and say, okay, within this module or within this date range, show me what was changed within my Oracle EBS environment. And then you can go through the process of oftentimes tying those changes to, for instance, a help desk ticket. If you use ServiceNow, just so you can, from an audit perspective, you can tie the change in Oracle to a help desk ticket if that type of change warrants a help desk ticket. Not all changes are created equally or have importance. So, but this is where you get your dashboard to drill in to see what changed over a period of time, or by module, or by user, whatever the case is. Okay. So, from an application solution perspective, the goal here is really to have that continuous visibility to not only what users have access to within the system, whether it be restricted access, meaning who specifically can update my vendor master, who specifically can enter an AP invoice, but the visibility to know, well, who can enter an AP invoice and do something else. And then for some of your users that have a higher level of access and can actually have access to your configurations within Oracle, you really want to have that visibility to know, well, what are they doing with that access? Are they making changes to my chart of accounts when they're not supposed to be? Are they updating approval limits when they're not supposed to be? That's what the Audit Trail application allows you to do, is to take, know that something is monitoring in the background, that if and when a user does make a change, that you will be able to pinpoint exactly what they did and when they did it within the application. All right. Now, Trish, do we want to, and Alex, do we want to open up for questions? Do we want to, where do you want to go from here?
Sure. Yes, if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the chat box. You can also raise your hand, the question box or the chat box, and you can raise your hand and we can unmute you as well. So we'll just give it a minute while we see if anyone has questions. I'm not seeing any questions yet. Brian, you just did such a great job of it. Nobody needed questions. Oh, wait, we do have one. Hold on one second. Okay. We got one. All right. Does Fastpath provide alerts via email, for example, when an audit trail change is made?
Yes. Yes. Depending on, you can define who gets notified based on what change is made. So you can set it to a distribution list to an individual user. But yes, the answer is yes. Yeah, because it's, you don't want to have to, the values, you don't want to have to, many of the users of a solution like this are not going to be in the change tracking or audit trail application every single day. However, if they get, they might be the owner of a given module, and if I'm, for instance, the accounts payable manager, and a change is made to accounts payable, I would want to know. I shouldn't have to go into audit trail every single day just to see if something changed. I'd want to be notified proactively, and that's exactly what happens. One other thing too I want to highlight about the audit trail product is it's not limited to a specific, or to a set of Oracle modules. So if you have a pretty wide footprint of Oracle applications, financial, supply chain, manufacturing, HR, payroll, the applications can support you in being able to monitor those configurations. The reason I say there are other products on the market that say that only give you the ability to track changes within very specific modules. With Audit Trail, you're not limited. It's broad across Oracle's footprint. So if you use order management, if you use sourcing, and there's configurations associated with those modules, those configurations can be monitored using Audit Trail. And again, I want to also emphasize the fact this is not just for Oracle. So if you do have other applications this can go across a fair number of other ERPs, as I put on that one slide. So you don't have to go out and buy multiple solutions. This solution is a one-stop shop, and so from a single dashboard, you can see across those ERPs.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for mentioning that. That some of those other systems are, the full Microsoft Dynamics suite, including AX, GP, NAV, their CRM offering. I think, like Brian had also mentioned, systems like NetSuite, Intact, SAP, Salesforce, just to name a few.
A huge differentiator in the market, and again, many of our clients have more than just Oracle. And for too long, they've not had a solution for those other applications. So this is welcome to them to know that out of the box they can start monitoring what users can do and what changes are made to those applications.
Great, thanks, Brian. I don't see any other questions. Let me just double check though. Kay said, "Thank you, Brian."
I see that. Yeah. Thank you, Kay, for the question.
Well, I don't see any other questions, but if people do think of questions afterwards, Alex and Brian's email address are also up there as well. So
yeah,
you can always reach out that way.
Yeah, and I did want to point there are other slides at the back here that we didn't want to make this presentation to be overly sales, and we really wanted to kind of hit at the core of why this the importance of these solutions. But there are other slides that kind of give a more of an introduction to Fastpath, more of an introduction to Appsurance. So just know that if this presentation, if you keep going past this slide here, there are other slides that give you more introduction to Fastpath and Appsurance.
Perfect, thank you. And again, a reminder that we will send out